Welcome to Life in the Pit, a podcast about the lives and adventures of instrumentalists within the wonderful world of musical theater. And now, here is your host, David Lane.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 75. I'm looking forward to chatting with our guest today, and I'm going to tell you more about her in just a moment. As this episode is releasing, this is on the day of, I'm kind of excited. I'm going to be giving my first workshop as a podcaster at the state conference for the North Carolina Music Teachers Association, called Podcasting for Beginners, all of how to help people get started. And I'm probably going to archive that link, and it's not going to be something you'll go to YouTube and be able to find. But if you're ever interested in that, it is something I would be willing to share with you. So just send me a message if that's something you're interested in. As this is releasing, I probably don't have it available, but I should have it available soon. Also, stay tuned after my interview. I'm going to give you just kind of a brief teaser about my upcoming podcast that I plan to launch in January of 2023. And it's going to be probably a full month ahead before I release it on social media or do any official talk. So as Life in the Pit listeners, you're going to get a first listen of what I can tell you about my new podcast, but that will be after our conversation. So my guest today is Elisa Napoli, and it's almost hard to describe where she's from or where she's been, as we'll talk about early in our conversation. She's originally from Italy, but she's lived all over the world. She currently lives in New Zealand, which, from where I live, it is I believe, a 16-hour time difference, so I had kind of fun with that at the beginning of our conversation. We're not talking really about the pit today, but we're talking about a topic that affects all musicians, including, and I think sometimes even especially, pit musicians. That pressure that you may feel, some people would call it stage fright, but we're not really on stage, but there's still that pressure to play the right notes at the right time, and to not let others down, not to let yourself down. And, for lack of a better phrase, we'll call that stage fright. And my guest today, that's her specialty, is treating that. And she does that with some psychology. She does that also with hypnotherapy, which, if you're not sure about that, it really is a valid source of therapy, and we're going to talk more about it. But she is also the author of a book called Dare to be Seen, and she is also an artist-songwriter who has dealt with this before in a personal way, which is what led her to helping others with their issues of playing in front of others, or playing in a performance situation when it really does matter. So if you ever have had any kind of anxiety about this before, you definitely want to check out this conversation. Also check out more of her works, which we will leave a link for at the end of this conversation. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Elisa Napoli. It's my pleasure today to be chatting with Elisa, and I said this before, Elisa, when I had a guest from Australia, because it's basically, I'm saying greetings from the past, because it is Sunday when we're recording where I am, but it's Monday where you are. So afternoon here and morning there. So good morning to you, and thank you for joining me today.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
Tell us just a little bit about who you are, what you do, and exactly where is it that you're located?
Well, I'm in New Zealand at the moment, in Wellington. I moved here last year after living in Scotland for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But originally I'm from Italy. And I do many things like you. I've got many hats. I wear many hats. But right. I guess I suppose the two main things I do, one is related to music. The other one is related to psychology and well-being. So on one hand, I am mindset coach, and I help people with all kinds of issues, but I specialize in performance, and especially to do with musicians. and performers of other kinds, like actors and comedians and that kind of thing. And on the other hand, I also play music myself. So I play, I sing. I'm a singer-songwriter and play the drums and the guitar and a bit of piano. And I'm very much into composition. I really love that side of things. And I also, within my practice as a coach, I do hypnosis. So I've been a hypnotherapist for 20 years. And I also teach songwriting, basically anything related to this sphere. I dip my toes in, and I'm an eternal student. I'm always constantly learning. That's me really in a nutshell, I guess.
Great. Well, it's great to hear from you and what you do. And, the performance anxiety, is one of the things that you talk about. And, my audience is mainly people who are interested in the pit and, for theater. And a lot of them are pit musicians themselves, but they also don't just play in the pit. They play in other aspects of life. But the pit is an interesting place because I'd say more than half the time, probably at least 3/4 of the time, you're not really being seen. You're under the stage or behind a set. People hear you, but they don't see you. So it's probably not the same type of thing when you're on stage and people are there to watch you and you're the center of attention. But there's a certain pressure, that comes with because if you're say a solo pianist, if something goes wrong, you can probably take a little liberty with the tempo or something like that, and you can kind of play around with it, do some improvisation. I've done that before. I've actually made up some music when I forgot it. But if you are part of an ensemble for a show, you have to start at a certain time for every song, every individual score, or every individual underscore. You have to play at a certain tempo, and if you're at a certain level, like on a touring, Broadway tour or on Broadway, you have to play every note correctly, or at least just about every note correctly. So we're going to come back to that, and I want to hear some things that you have to say on that. But I do have to ask, what has led to your world travels? Italy to Scotland to New Zealand. Those are not close.
No, I've also lived in London and in Ireland. I've kind of lived a bit of, not everywhere, but
Right.
I have lived in a few countries. It's a long story, but basically just to kind of put it in a nutshell, when I was 14, I decided that I wasn't going to stay in Italy for the rest of my life. I thought, just because I was born in a country doesn't mean I have to stay in this country. The world is big, and I am very lucky. This is, this kind of freedom is not given to everyone. And also in the past, I wouldn't have been able to do this. So I better take advantage of it now and see as much as I can of the world while it's possible.
Right.
And so that's kind of what started it. But then on top of that, my parents also, I guess, are a example for me, because they left Italy when they were 50 and they moved to New Zealand. And it was more of a political decision in the sense that they were not happy with the government and they wanted to live in a better place, when they were, as they were growing older, they wanted a better lifestyle. So they moved to New Zealand. And at the time I was like, no way I'm going to New Zealand. I don't even know what it is. For me, New Zealand was like the piano, the book, the movie, The Piano, which is totally not what New Zealand is about at all. But as a kid, I was like, oh no, they live in huts and they don't have any technology.
Right.
Like, nah, that's not New Zealand.
Well, I think, that was probably like the first thing. And then the Lord of the Rings trilogy kind of made New Zealand famous for a while, but at least in terms of the landscapes, but not like any of the civilizations or anything. But okay, great. Well, I mean, it sounds like you've had a very, very fun life. So tell us a little bit about your story of just being a musician and what led you to kind of specializing in helping performers.
Sure. Well, I suffered from performance anxiety since I was 16. At the time, I didn't know why, but I basically would tremble before going on stage. I would have trouble with performing well. I would be able to perform well at home, wonderfully, I would do prepare and know my pieces and everything. But then, if I got on stage, I would not be as good. And then I would berate myself afterwards and think, oh, God, that's terrible, or imagine that everyone hated it, etc. And nonetheless, I kept on playing or trying until I got to a point where I went, some performances went so badly, because I tried to get better by using methods such as, I'll just have a glass of wine, or I'll have beta blockers, or, I've tried everything. And none of these things really worked. And I got to a point that, for example, during a performance, I just completely stopped in the middle of it and forgot my song.
Right.
And drew a blank, and I knew this song really well. And suddenly the words were gone, the chords were gone, and I was humiliated, in the middle of this performance. I had to actually run out of the place. And at the time, I thought, okay, I'm never going to do this again. This is not me. I haven't got what it takes, etc. And so I got to a point where I was about to stop completely and give up. And something at that point changed inside of me. I thought, giving this up, it's like cutting off my arm. It's something that's so important to me. It's my passion. If I give up, then I might as well, I'm not going to live 100%, I'm half dead. So I thought I have to do something about this. That is not what I've been doing so far. And at that point, I was a therapist. I was a hypnotherapist mainly. And it had not occurred to me, for whatever reason, I think similar to the reason that fish can't know that they're in the sea, that I could use hypnosis for this problem. Right. And of course I could, but it just didn't occur to me. And at that point I thought, wait a minute, maybe I can. So I went to see another hypnotherapist, and I explained the problem. And I had a couple of sessions, and it really helped. Now, it didn't completely solve the problem, but it really helped, like much more than anything else until then. And so I thought, okay, if this helps like 70%, then I need to look into it more. And I started researching, and I started going to see other hypnotherapists and see what their approach was, learning from them, applying it to clients that I sought out on purpose to see, okay, how does this work? Does it not work? And so after quite a while, I put together a body of knowledge and understood, okay, what works with this is A, B, and C. And then applied it to myself, of course. And then I thought, okay, let's do it. Let's work with people with this problem, because, I know how horrible it is, and I don't want them to suffer as much as I have. And so after that, I basically developed everything else, my book, my course, etc., just to take it to more people, pretty much.
Right.
So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Okay. I'm not sure of all my listeners, who has experienced, hypnotherapy or hypnosis of any kind. I will say that there was a time in my life that, and I know people who still feel this way who have not experienced any kind of hypnosis firsthand. The thought was, well, these are stage, hypnotists especially are like stage magicians, and it's not really real. That's kind of the thought that I had. But then I found out in a very interesting way that there's something to it. And we have a county fair every year, and there was a hypnotist, and I thought it would just be fun to go watch it along with my wife. And it was outside, so we were on lawn chairs on the lawn, and he had volunteers on stage, and he told the audience, you can kind of participate if you want, close your eyes, and he did something like, he said something like, I'm going to count backwards from 3, when you get to 2, your eyelids are going to be twice as heavy, and when you get to 1, your whole body is just going to feel heavy. And he set it up by having you think of something calm, like an ocean, and just smell the salt. And I participated in all that. And he started counting back from 3, and then he got to 2, and I could tell that my body was getting heavy, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to see what's going to happen here. And I tried to get back out of it, but he said 1. And then the next thing I remember was I was face down on the grass because I completely collapsed. And
Wow.
And everyone around me was just like, apparently people were like, what's wrong with this guy? What happened? But I was participating to the point that I was fully in it. And I've looked up since then, and, maybe you can tell me what your research says, but some people are more susceptible than others. And I'm obviously very highly susceptible, when it comes to hypnosis.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. There's a bit of a misunderstanding around hypnosis, or a big one, actually. And it's about the fact that people think the power of hypnosis lies within the hypnotist, but it doesn't. The power of hypnosis lies within the person that actually practices hypnosis, meaning hypnosis is a skill. Right. It's a skill just like anything else. If you don't want to be hypnotized, you're not going to be hypnotized. If you decide, you know what, I'm not going to collaborate with this, I'm not going to do what the hypnotist says, I'm not going to imagine this and that, it's not going to work, right? Of course it's not. But if you decide, okay, I'm going to do this, it's going to work, because it's like your subconscious is like a foreign land, and the hypnotist is your guide. But at the end of the day, you need to decide whether you're going to go in it, you're going to actually walk the paths that are being shown to you. You could just decide not to walk the paths.
Right.
And so that's what it is, And also, on the other hand, what I want to explain is that the idea of, hypnosis is this magical, mysterious thing. Some people think it's evil. Some people think it's, supernatural. It's not supernatural. It's not evil. It's not good or bad. It's basically a very natural state that we go in pretty much every day, but we don't do anything with it. So, for example, when you fall asleep and you are in between being awake and actually dreaming, you go into the hypnagogic state of mind, which is very similar to it. It's basically an hypnotic state of mind where you are susceptible, but you don't use it. You don't give yourself suggestions or what people call affirmations. You don't do that, do you? You don't imagine specific things. You just kind of allow your mind to do its own thing. But the difference with hypnotherapy is that the hypnotist or hypnotherapist actually causes that state, helps you to get into that stage, and then uses some processes to help you resolve the problem that you have or achieve the goal that you set yourself. It's basically using your imagination in a focused and relaxed state of mind. And that's an optimal learning state.
I was thinking, as you're saying that, and also thinking about how, easily susceptible I was. And I wonder, how much of my background as a musician kind of prepares me for that. So for one thing, I'm a composer, so I'm always sitting down and writing, and of course I get into the mechanics of how the chords work together and the melody and the structure. But I'm also thinking, imagining how the image that this might convey, when I'm writing the music. And also, when you're playing, I think especially, when you reach a level and you're not just doing technique, but you're getting into the artistry, I think most musicians lose themselves in the moment. I think that's a very common expression. And you might even call it a flow state, I think is what some people would call it.
Yes.
And you're aware of what you're doing, but you're not necessarily trying very hard. It's not like I'm like, what is that next note? You're not thinking like that. It's like your subconscious is taking over. Your fingers are going to the right place, and you're also tapping into the emotion of the music. And it seems to me, that this sounds like very similar to the state that you're talking about.
Absolutely, it is the same state. It is the same state. The only difference is what you do with it, you
Right.
know. And what you are doing with it is you're building a landscape, an emotional landscape,
Right.
and you are also you get out of your way when you're talking about the fact that your fingers go automatically where they want to go. Yes, of course they do, because you're not consciously thinking about, oh, I need to put my index finger there, and you don't do that. If you do that, you're going to make a mistake.
Right.
And so, because that's your conscious mind, and your conscious mind is much slower than
Right.
your subconscious mind. So basically you're getting the subconscious mind out of the way so that you can go into that deeper, more emotional state. And that's exactly what you're describing. That's exactly what we want,
Yes.
when we play 100%. And what gets in the way is when you're anxious, your conscious mind gets in the way, and you start thinking, oh, what if that happens and what if that happens, and then you break the flow. Or you use your subconscious to imagine the opposite of what you want. So you imagine all the terrible things that could happen. Oh, maybe I will forget where my fingers go, or maybe I'll make a mistake, and you imagine that. And as you imagine that, you create it, because whatever you say to yourself, whatever you say to yourself, in words, your mind creates in images, and the images gets translated into emotions. And that becomes reality, and it actually happens
Right.
inside you, so you totally lose the flow and go into this nightmare reality where all the worst fears become true.
Right. You talked about a book you wrote, I believe it's called Dare to Be Seen, From Stage Fright to Stage Presence. And I regret I didn't get a chance to read that before talking to you. So just tell us a little bit about the book and an overview.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is very practical. It's divided in two parts. What I always think when I read how-to books is give me an actual path. Don't just waffle about, how wonderful you are and your clients are, because I don't care. What I want to do is I want to read this book and I want to get something out of it that I can actually implement. That was my objective when I wrote the book. So I thought, okay, first of all, we need to have a framework. I need to explain why the techniques that I'm going to teach you actually work, so that you are not just blind. You can understand the basis of what I teach you. So the first part of the book is more theoretical. It talks about anxiety, what anxiety is, why it happens. It talks about the subconscious, the conscious. And when I say conscious, subconscious, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's like a place in your brain where the subconscious lives. It's not really like that. It's more like a metaphor to explain the automatic functions, the way we basically it's everything that's happening underneath conscious awareness. And the second part of the book is more practical in the sense that I give you a path to follow. So it's like, okay, there's 10 sessions. Each of these 10 sessions is addressing a particular aspect of performance anxiety. If you start from number 1 and you get a number 10, that's the best way to go, where you're going to build on each session. And the idea as well is that you can either do this by yourself. So I equip my readers to create an e-product track on their own, or if they're like, look, I don't have time, I don't want to do it, or, I'm afraid that maybe I'm not doing it well or whatever, I want someone that has more experience, then I also offer some, an online course that's connected to the book where all of the sessions are already recorded by me. So that's pretty much it. And within this, there are some case studies as well.
Nice, yeah. When it comes to conscious and subconscious, actually, I talk about this in my lessons. I often refer to like just the act of walking. I think, by the time we're aware of what's going on, we actually have already learned to walk in, most cases. And we forget actually how complicated of an activity is, enough so that like robots have not quite learned to do it correctly, and that no other animal can do it quite the way we do. And it's a lot of muscular balance, coordination. And if you had to think really hard about it, walking would not be anything you'd want to choose to do, unless you absolutely had to. And yet now, as I tell my students, you just think, I'm here, I want to get there. You stand up, you walk. And at some point, getting on a bicycle is the same thing. And then for adults, getting in a car is the same thing. It's like I still remember thinking, how much pressure do I put on the brake so that I don't go past the stop sign? And the first time I tried it, I stopped way short because I knew that I better do that than go past it. And then after a while, I see the stop sign, and I just put my foot just knows what to do. It doesn't really know what to do. It's our subconscious mind.
Yeah, exactly. Because you go from unconscious incompetence, so you don't know that you don't know, to conscious incompetence, you know that you don't know, to conscious competence, so you know that you know, and then unconscious competence, you don't know that you know.
I like that. Yeah. I have to remember those. That's very good. You said that you have, your book has a lot of materials, but I thought one thing that was interesting that you offered to share was 6 fundamental mind hacks for achieving lasting performance success. So what are the 6 fundamental mind hacks? So
this is to achieve success in general, but of course, performance success is what we're after.
Right.
And what I mean success in general is basically getting the results you're after. Mm-hmm. So the first one is that your mind does what it thinks you want it to. And what does that mean? Well, from the moment that, we get into this world, your mind's job is to keep you alive, right?
Right.
And how does it know that? Well, it takes you away from pain towards pleasure. But how does it know that something is pleasurable versus not? Of course, if it's physical, it's pretty clear. If it's painful physically, then that's, something you don't want. But psychologically, well, that depends on the person. For someone, jumping off a plane might be the most exhilarating thing they could do. For another, it's terrifying. Mm-hmm. So how do we know the difference? Well, it's what we say to ourselves about the experience. If we, in our minds, in our inner talk, we say, "Oh God, it's I don't want to go to work because it's terrible. It's going to be a terrible day, and I hate playing music, and oh my God, people are going to laugh at me. I'm going to make a mistake." Basically, you're communicating to your brain that this is a dangerous, painfully so experience. It's a psychologically painful experience. So your brain goes, "Oh, right, this is painful. We're not going to do it then. We're going to try to avoid it as much as possible." So once your mind knows what you think is good or bad for you, it's simply your slave. It will try to help you avoid that thing. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's number one. Number 2 is that your mind responds only to 2 things. The words you say to yourself, like I said before, inside your own head, and if you are telling someone else, and also the pictures that you make in your mind. And those pictures are also created automatically when you speak to yourself.
Yeah.
So those words produce pictures in your mind, and it doesn't matter if it's something you don't want. So if I say to myself, "Oh, I don't want to make a fool out of myself when I'm on the pit," mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that you imagine is you making a fool out of yourself in the pit. Yep. Why? Because not is a word that doesn't have any actual content. It's simply there to deny, another word. It's simply like it's not connected to an object, whereas everything else is. So that's why you really should try and avoid saying to yourself things you don't want, and ask yourself, what would I rather have instead? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's number 2. The number 3 is that emotions trumps logic, which means that your prefrontal cortex is connected to your analytical thinking mind, and your amygdala is connected to your emotional mind. Also, we could think of it as emotional brain versus rational brain, if you like. Actual parts of our brains were, our primitive brain is the first one that, evolutionarily speaking, we as humans developed, and then there was the emotional brain, and then finally the last one. And the thing is, we think that our logical brain is the one that has all the power, but that's not true at all. The emotional brain and the reptilian brain have the power. So you could think whatever you like in a rational way, but if you emotionally feel different, the emotional brain is going to win.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I just want to interject with that. I think anybody who takes time to think about that knows that this is true, especially if you ever had any bad habits you're trying to break, or any good habits you're trying to start. I think if you're not inclined to exercise, if you haven't been inclined to exercise regularly, and you keep saying, I'm going to start doing this, and maybe you do, and then you stop, and it's because that you might, in your brain, you might think intellectually know, I need to do this, but is a lot more to it than creating the habit of doing that. And that comes to, the way I understand it, the emotional brain has to engage in it has to identify, it has to say that what you're trying to avoid is painful, and that what you're trying to accomplish is pleasurable. I actually just started reading. I put them off for decades, but Tony Robbins, his book Awaken the Giant Within, and I'm 100 pages into it, but it's basically in a nutshell. That's what he's saying that I think harmonizes with what I've read elsewhere. It's just
absolutely
you have to create pleasure and pain in the right aspects of your life. So
absolutely, and Tony Robbins is one of the people that I very much admire, and he everything he talks about is NLP. NLP is based on hypnotherapy. So really, like, we're talking about the same thing. It's just that he doesn't use hypnosis in a very formal way.
Right.
He just induces it really quickly by saying to people, by shocking people, stopping their patterns, and then getting them to connect to positive emotions, which is, Also, it helps that he does it in these big groups with thousands of people, because when you're put on the spot like that, you don't really want to fail, so to speak. You don't want to go, oh, well, actually, you don't want to resist. He's going to not allow you to resist.
Right.
So,
right.
So to just finish on that one, though, about emotion, there's an element of it that's important, that's connected to your rational mind. So when you think a thought, like I said before, it produces a certain image. That image produces an emotion. So when you have negative thoughts and you indulge them, well, you are actually creating negative feelings. So it is important to become more mindful and aware of when you're having those thoughts, and actually decide, what, I don't have to indulge this. It's there, it's a thought, that's all it is. But I decide how much energy I give it. How much attention am I going to give this thought, and what other thought could I actually give more attention to create a better feeling? I'm not a victim here. I do have some power, and I can trick my emotional self using my rational mind. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, so hack 4 is that it's all about repetition. Repetition. Repetition is the key to change any of your beliefs. If you think about it, the advertising industry really knows this, right? They show us the same ad again and again and again, and eventually we go to the supermarket and buy that toothpaste instead of the other one because we're used to it. It's like, it's gone in. We've seen it enough time. So the same goes with your negative beliefs versus your positive beliefs. If you say to yourself all the time, oh God, I'm actually not good enough, and I don't deserve to be here playing this instrument, I'm sure there's other people that are better than me, blah, blah, blah. You say this to yourself again, 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 eventually you're going to believe it. So you have to switch this kind of self-talk and start to give yourself a chance by saying to yourself things that you can believe. Like, so for example, actually, remembering all my successes, remembering what I can do, remembering that I'm improving. The more I play, the better player I become, etc. And then eventually, when you're ready, actually saying to yourself, "Oh, I'm good. I can do this."
Right.
And I'm a master, if you like. And because whatever you focus on expands, so you got to focus on what you want, not what you don't. Right.
Right.
And then hack number 5 is that what you expect tends to be realized. Mm-hmm. And as a teacher, you probably know this very well.
Yeah.
You know that if you expect your students not to do very well, mm-hmm. they will pick that up and they won't. And if you expect them to do well and you really mean it, they will also start to expect that from themselves. Whatever you expect them to be realized. So when you say to yourself that you're liked and accepted, you will behave in a more friendly way, for example, towards people, and then people will respond positively. If you think of yourself as incapable or awkward, you will act also in that way, and you will have people respond to you mirroring that belief.
Yeah, so I heard a podcaster say this recently, and it was a challenge to the way I've thought about this before, but it harmonizes with what you just said. I kind of grew up with I guess expect the best, but hope for the best, but expect the worst. Mm. But yeah, I heard a podcaster say recently, you should expect so much from yourself that you're totally surprised by failure. It's like it just completely catches you off guard. And so what you want to do is condition yourself to make that acceptable to you. Like, surprise, that didn't work out. But you never expect that. You expect that what you do is going to succeed and that you're going to be successful. And it just sounds like if you make a habit of that, that's where that repetition comes in.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I've got this saying that I keep on saying I should have a T-shirt with it on it. But my saying is expect the best, accept the rest.
Right.
Right. So, yes, expect the ideal outcome, put your best effort in, mm-hmm. and trust that that's all you can do.
Yeah.
And leave the rest of it to the universe, if you like. It's like the art of archery. Right?
Yeah.
You imagine you aim, you really concentrated, you want to get there, right? And then you relax, mm-hmm. you trust that the arrow will go where it needs to go. And if it doesn't, it's okay. You can then take the failure as feedback and go, okay, what did I do there that I could improve? Right. Oh, I was tense. Oh, right. Okay, so I need to relax more. So like, I was reading a bit of your blog before, and you talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is about as well. It's about not having this fixed mindset that, oh God, I made a mistake, therefore I am a failure. But more like the failure is just feedback. It's just telling me something I need to change, and I can learn from it and move on.
Right.
It's not about who I am.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. And that was, I'm sorry, I think you said 5. I think 5. You finished 5. Yeah.
So number 6, number 6 is that your mind loves what is familiar and rejects what is unfamiliar. Mm-hmm. And this is tied with repetition. So basically, it makes evolutionary sense. If something is familiar, it's something you already know. So it is more likely that you know how to deal with it if things go wrong. Okay. Mm-hmm. So then your subconscious loves what is familiar because it makes it feel safe, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, if you stay safe in your comfort zone, you're never really going to learn anything new. So the idea is that you need to make the familiar unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar, familiar.
Right.
So if, for example, your familiar self-talk is all negative, is all about what you don't want, you're going to have to switch it around and make it unfamiliar by making the opposite familiar, by repetition. So, if you put yourself down every day, start by actually appreciating the things you do well, more and more and more and more and more. Mm-hmm. Self-esteem is healthy self-esteem, and is all about having positive regard for yourself while being aware of your flaws. Mm-hmm. So it's not a Pollyanna kind of attitude of I'm perfect. Of course, you're not perfect. No one is. Yeah. But you're aware of the areas of improvement without putting yourself down for it. You just accept this is being human. And again, growth mindset, I'm going to get better and better and better. But you need to be kind, because if you're not kind and encouraging to yourself, you're going to use all your energy putting yourself down, feeling bad, and then you're going to have no energy left to actually grow. You wouldn't do that to a kid. You wouldn't go to a kid and say, you're good for nothing. Mm-hmm. You that would be abusive, right? But you do. But it's normal to do it to yourself. No, shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah. I feel like these are all things that, a musician who studied with good teachers, that nothing you said should sound revolutionary. It should sound like, because I've had a variety of teachers, and the best ones, are basically saying the same kind of thing. There's actually a book that I was given when I graduated high school called The Inner Game of Music, and it's basically a musical, reiteration of the Inner Game of Tennis. That was the original book from like the 70s. And and so much of it is about trying to achieve what they call self-2, or the flow state, or the especially, I think this is really important for most musicians. For me, it's turning off the sports commentator. It's like, he just made that mistake. It's like, I guess you need to practice that more. But the problem is well, that's now 2 measures in the past, and you can't do that. I remember one time I did a piano concert, and I opened up with Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and I completely nailed it. I was focused in the zone, and then I went to the next piece, and I was still celebrating how I did with the Beethoven, and I think I started, I was maybe 24, 25, so I was, pretty arrogant and, still more youthful than I wanted to admit. And I think I imagined, like, I wonder what I look like at the piano from that person's perspective in the third row. And then I realized I'm making all kinds of mistakes. I've never played it this bad before, and it just reminded me, there's a balance. It's like you want to expect the best, but you also want to constantly stay in the moment and not be thinking about what just happened.
That was the conscious mind getting in the way. And the commentator is always your conscious mind,
right?
And when you hear it, it means you're not in the moment. You are already, you're subconscious. You're looking at yourself playing, and that's the moment when you need to come back.
Yeah.
It's like a meditation exercise. To me, playing an instrument is a meditation, because you will get out of it. I remember myself always thinking, oh God, imagining the moment when I showed this to my parents. I imagine the moment that I showed it to my boyfriend or whatever, Right. And then even if I got into the positive one, like, oh, that was brilliant. Oh, look at me, I'm so great. It's like, now I'm not in it anymore. So bring myself back to the music itself.
Right.
And get out of the way. This isn't about you. In fact, a musician, in my opinion, is a channel for the music. It's like a hollow reed where the music flows, flows inside, and you're just a vessel. You should get out of the way. This isn't about you. Your job is to express that music as well as you can, but that's it.
Yeah.
It's about the music, not you.
I've always wondered over the years, like, what's the best advice to give to students who have not done recitals before, and I feel like the advice that was given me was not the best, and that was, when you're at the recital, pretend that you're by yourself. And I thought, well, that's really hard because I know that other people are there. So I've tried inverting that advice. I've tried saying, when you're at home practicing, pretend that there are other people watching you. And I even suggest things like turn on the TV and down low. You kind of have a little murmuring in the background. But I guess, yeah, I know the best thing to do would be if you've got a lot of family that comes over or friends, just anytime anyone comes over, hey, let me play my piece for you. So you get used to that. But if you don't have that situation, how do you recommend transitioning from that solitary practice to being in front of people, even if you're underneath the stage, but people are there, they're listening, they may even be judging how you play. How do you get from one to the other?
Well, it's a process, and it depends on your particular circumstance. But one of the things that I start with is actually recording videos of myself, because I find that even that sometimes can be a trigger. It's like, oh, I'm recording a video, so it must be perfect, or that kind of thing.
Right.
A live stream can be the same thing, right? But the other thing is, like you say, is yes, I think imagining a positive audience, imagining they're having the right relationship with your audience.
Right.
Your audience is not there to judge. That's not what their job is. The audience job is to enjoy themselves. They came there to see you because they want to enjoy themselves.
Right.
And if you enjoy yourself, they'll enjoy themselves. Yeah. So you are going to take care of them by being connected to them and being connected to your music. Obviously, if you're a pit musician, you're not really connected to the audience because they can't see you.
Right.
But you can still imagine that connection.
Yeah.
It all starts in the mind anyway. So I would suggest rehearsing. If you can't actually have a performance outside with a few people, if you can't, for whatever reason, have a bunch of performances that get more and more, where there's more and more people, that would be the ideal. To start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., 10, 100, whatever. If you can't do that, then at least do it in your mind. So rehearse. Imagine that you're in the pit. Imagine that it's actually happening, because you know what? Your brain doesn't see the difference between something you imagine and something that actually happens. It is really the same. It's like there've been experiments where they have put a musician inside an MRI scan with a actual keyboard practicing a scale, and then they have taken the keyboard away and it said, okay, now imagine practicing the scale, and the areas of the brain that light up are the same, whether you have the keyboard or not. So it doesn't matter. So just use your imagination instead and imagine the perfect performance. The performance where you're relaxed, where you feel good about your piece of music, everyone's enjoying themselves, you're enjoying yourself, number one, and the audience is also responding really well.
Yeah. And that kind of also, that goes right with what I've heard. I've heard many technology experts, they'll be asked something like, what do you think is going to be like the biggest impact on society in the next 20, 30 years? And the most popular answer is VR, virtual reality. And
we have a virtual reality inside already. We don't need VR.
Yeah, no. But it's one of those, you're doing something that's not really happening, but it really feels like it is. And that just shows how powerful our mind can be.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Have you ever tried one of those machines yourself?
I have not. I tried something where it was just kind of like, it was a headset, and just kind of looking around, but not anything extensively, but no, I have a friend who's who's a guitarist, but he's also, his pandemic project was learning about VR and how to program, and he says that he's been creating art rooms, and you can, with the drawings that he's done, and you can put on the headset and you can actually walk in the gallery, touch the paintings, and it just feels so real. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Well, I want to just talk about, what are some of the things that you do. I know that you have a podcast. I believe you do. You have one called Dare to Be Seen.
Yeah, the podcast is at the moment in hiatus because I'm just too busy with everything else. So I've decided that for the moment that's it. I've done 2 seasons, and it was about interviewing female indie singer-songwriters and asking them about their life as musicians and challenges and what really works for them in terms of creation and composition and performance. So that was fascinating. I met a lot of really cool people, but then I was like, oh my God, this is so much of my time. I can't keep going. So for now, it's on hiatus.
Right, and that's why Life in the Pit is not as frequent as it has been. So I certainly understand. What are some of the services that you offer, and where can people find out how to contact you and how to find out more about that?
Yeah, so I offer one-on-one coaching and sessions. I also have a online course called Dare to Be Seen, connected to my book. And I offer also a free masterclass. And I wanted to offer something to your audience. So I thought, well, I could give your audience a free copy of my book. And so if they want this, they can go to my website, which is elisadinapoli.com/pit. And they will be able to grab a copy of the book. And also on my website, there's a free masterclass on performance anxiety and feeling. In this masterclass, there's a very valuable pre-performance ritual that I have developed that helps you feel calm just before you're about to go on stage. So a very practical masterclass, that one is. And yeah, so that's where you can find out more about me. And if you want to hear my music, you can go to my other website, which is elisavulpes.com. That's Elisa with an Y in it and 2 S's.
Well, great, and thank you for that generous offer. And I'll put that in our show notes so that people can find that. And I guess that's about it. So. Thank you for taking time to chat with me today, and I hope the rest of your day goes well.
Yeah, you too. It's been a real pleasure.
And that just about wraps up episode 75. Again, her generous offer of a free book, you can find that at elisadinapoli.com/pit. And if you need to spell that, you'll see that in the show notes. And also just a reminder, also in the show notes, there's a link for Fonz if you have a private studio of any kind and want to really save time on your admin work, your billing, and your scheduling. I just can't recommend it enough. So be sure to check that out. This episode was a bit monumental for Life in the Pit in that it's, hopefully not the last episode. I think I've got some more guests coming up, and this podcast is going to continue, again, I think about an average of once a month, so I suspect that in November I'll have a new episode for you. Officially, I can't really commit to a schedule at the moment for various reasons, but one of those has to do with my new podcast. So I mentioned that this episode was monumental, and it's because it really didn't have anything directly to do with pit musicians. It had to do with a topic that affects pit musicians, but that's because it had to do with a topic that affects really all musicians who do any kind of performing. And so going forward, this podcast is going to be, a little bit more firmly inside the box of pit musicians. It's going to be a podcast just about the experiences of various pit musicians. And again, we've covered a lot of things. So, if we do go outside the box, it's going to be very heavily for pit musicians. There's a few episodes I could think where I might talk about the pit that may not be from exactly within inside the pit. But it's going to go back to the more niche way that it was. And in the future, episodes that are like what I just shared is going to provide the content for my new podcast, but that's only going to be part of what I'm doing. I have a name for my new podcast, but it's a working title, so I don't want to share it until it's an official title, and that I'll announce on social media, and I plan to do that at some point in November, probably mid to late November. We'll see. I'm not positive of the timeline for that. But I'll tell you what it's about. My new podcast is going to be about the craft of musicianship. And, if you think about what's something that you've heard quite a bit on this podcast, you've heard about the importance of being able to sight read. So I'm going to have a lot of episodes from my own experience. So there'll be quite a few solo episodes, but I'm also going to get some guests who teach sight reading. And that's going to be, one of the episodes, for example. Going to be some more multiple guest episodes, kind of some roundtable discussions. And we're going to be talking about how to become better at practicing. How do you learn a new instrument for the first time? How do you get better at theory? How do you take up composing? We're going to explore all the different types of music careers you can have and just go through kind of the toolkit. What do you need to work on to be able to do that? And I wanted to do that because this is really what I'm most passionate about when I'm teaching. I love teaching piano, and, I like teaching piano technique in the repertoire, but I love teaching about how to become an expert at practicing your music, at learning the music on your own, of how to understand the music better in terms of theory. So these are the things that I just love talking about. I have a lot of friends and colleagues, that are experts in their own field, and I'm going to bring them in. And what I expect is that the average episodes are going to be shorter than Life in the Pit. What I hope to do is to have 2 episodes a week, and I'm not sure which days yet, so that's still in planning. It will either be Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. I'm not sure which. But the plan is to have kind of a short episode, one that's kind of for inspiration or kind of a thought of the week, and one that will be a little bit longer, but I'm hoping like the average episode is going to be closer to 30 minutes than an hour in most cases. So it'll be a lot of content, it'll be a lot of regular content, and it's going to be, of course, a lot broader. But I share this with you guys because I think that 90% of what I share is going to be something where even if being a pit musician is your main goal, I think you're going to find value in what this new podcast has to offer because, as you've heard, even a lot of the Broadway guests say, pit is part of what they do. But being a well-rounded musician and having the craft to be able to get work. So that's the other thing is there's a lot of podcasts out there about music business and some really good ones out there. But they all kind of assume that you've done what you can to become a great musician. And we also live in a time where getting to college is expensive. And not everybody with the talent and the drive to be a musician can necessarily afford to go to school. So my idea is to create a podcast that if you listen to every episode and you get some mentors and you work with some people that you can't afford, that you can become a great musician. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to become my main podcast, but Life in the Pit will stay on as something for pit musicians. That's all about pit music. So stay tuned for all that. As a reminder, if you want to follow what's coming up next, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Life in the Pit Pod. You can follow me on Instagram at David Lane Music or Twitter and Facebook at David M. Lane Music. And as always, a special thank you to Mark Parolo for his cover art and to Bill Cisna for providing the introduction to this podcast. The music is composed and performed by David Lane. You can find out more about this podcast, leave feedback, or donation at lifeinthepitpod.com. Please rate and review on the Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please share with your friends. Thank you for listening.